Hey everybody. Welcome to the show again. I'm Alex Pault, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Talking Timepieces. This is another one of our live streams, which is, I admit, my favorite part of this channel. We do a lot of, pre-recorded episodes, but to me, the live stream is the most important aspect because that's where you get to ask me questions and I get to respond and ask you questions, and we have a conversation because that's what a community is all about. There are a lot of communities in the world, in the industries that exist around us. And unfortunately, a lot of them are kind of cold. You know what I mean? And I'm a lucky man and a blessed man in a lot of different ways. And one of them is that I belong to two really wonderful communities, and one of them is the watch collecting community, and the other is I'm a member of the embedded electronic engineering community. And yes, they're both very geeky communities, and they're both very technically focused communities. But just because you're a technical person doesn't mean you don't have a warm heart or fealty to your friends or any other aspect of community. It's just that luckily, being in a technical community, it reduces the BS level. You know what I mean? There are fewer things that are uncertain, and it's harder for a charlatan to come in and mislead us from whichever direction. I'm not trying to point any fingers. I'm just saying that I'm lucky that the areas that I spend my time are very defined. The watch has to tell time. The microcontroller has to work. The transistor has to switch. The capacitor has to store power. So technical spaces are a little purer than consumer spaces. But then again, which leads us directly into the conversation for tonight, right? Is the watch industry is not, for its technical roots, it is not a clean and tidy environment. But then again, neither is the embedded electronic community. It's just disorganized in a different fashion. But when you think about something that should be based on, because we had a very long conversation last week and I loved it, about why a watch has value, you know? And hey, Antares, good evening. Live long and prosper. Greetings and long life to all of you, and not just the ones who say anything on the chat. But of course, I'll call you out by name if you say something. No, but the thing is that for an industry that should be more uh, stable, let's say that way, the watch market is very volatile price wise in certain ways. And that's what I wanted to talk about this evening. And of course, answer any of your questions or talk about any of the topics that you would like to bring up. This is just the icebreaker for the hour that is ahead of us. But actually, the topic of this conversation, when it came to watch prices and the watch market right now and the instability, I try to stay out of that kind of stuff because I'm not good with money, but I am good with markets. Oh, hey, Jonas, Jonas, how's it going? Greetings and long life. Johnny Arsenal, how's it going, my friend? Um, and frankly, recently, for example, watch prices have gone soft. Now, as Einstein said, everything is, reality pertains to the perspective, it's relative to the perspective of the viewer. And to some people, the watch market hasn't done anything because they're buying Seikos and they're buying Casios, and those haven't gone down in price. Nothing at retail has gone down in price. Not even all these watches that people are, having conniptions about and freaking out and gloom and doom. Not one of the watches mentioned, none of them have gone down at retail. Not one. So when people say Rolex price collapse ain't happen at retail, they're talking about the gray market. They're talking about the aftermarket. And that's the part of a market that should be more tidy, like a technical market, where it's not. Because even in the embedded electronics market, you've got gray marketers. Especially right now, there's a chip shortage. So there are people floating around with a container full of cheap capacitors trying to bang them off on somebody because they desperately need to have those clock radios. Well, nobody does clock radios anymore. Those infant monitors or some other gadget that they're making, they got to push them out the door. And the level of the application, they'll take any capacitor. They'll test them before they put them in the machine, and they're probably figuring on a 10% to 20% fail, which actually in a modern, even a shitty modern capacitor, you're probably only going to have about a 5 to 10% fail rate, because because that's the thing about modern manufacturing, and we're seeing it in watches. The baseline has gone up so much. I mean, you buy a computer milling machine, even a cheap computer milling machine is going to have less than a micron clearance. Half a micron, quarter micron. I mean, 20 years ago, a micron was considered precise. In today's world, even a cheap piece of junk can make you something with half a micron precision, which is enough for a cheap watch or a cheap clock radio, to use a bad analogy earlier. Hey, got some nice comments coming in. Antares, I bought a used Breitling Chronomat BO1 Bentley. The quality is really good, and the watch looks like it came straight from the factory. Now, the thing about the Breitling Bentleys is that's their DeVille, Omega DeVille. They're trying to show their robustness. They're trying to show their quality. They're trying to show their horology in a little classier package than you're normally used to seeing. And so Breitling seized on Bentley. Now, let me go into cars for a moment, if I may, because as some of you may know, I am a cars man. My father owned a garage and gas station in Brooklyn, and I'm a mechanic myself, growing up in a garage, pumping gas on the weekends when I was a child. And Bentley is a very, very interesting story. The closest thing I can think of in the watch world would be Zenith, but that doesn't even come close. And the Zenith story is a good one. I encourage you to look at my video on that. But Bentley came about. Today's Bentley is a completely different company from the Bentley of 50 years ago. Completely different company in every sense, every single sense of the term. So what happened is Rolls-Royce was going out of business because they were a badly mismanaged, bloated company. And frankly, I don't see the only difference I see between the current Rolls-Royce and the previous Rolls-Royce is they have better money managers. I still think their products are bloated. And I mean, even Jacob & Co. on the watch side has frivolous, gaudy watches, but they don't look as anal retentive with a 2x4 shoved up your you-know-what as a Rolls-Royce. And so they were going out of business. And the British government said, you got to sell yourself. And they put themselves up for bid. And Volkswagen had the highest bid. BMW had a bid. BMW had a bid, drinking Beck's Unfiltered today. But Volkswagen's bid was higher. And Rolls-Royce is like, well, we want to sell to BMW. And the British courts are like, duh, go for the highest bid. Your pride cannot be measured in dollars to the British people. And so Rolls-Royce pulled one of the most underhanded, and I literally know people who did it. The old Military TV Guide magazine had something very similar happen to it. And I've been in the I was in the publishing industry in the 80s and 90s, dealing with the American military market. When I was also selling to the American military market, I was a busy boy back in the 80s and 90s. And so what happened was is that BMW was forced by the no, Rolls-Royce was forced by the courts to sell the company to Volkswagen. Rolls-Royce was forced by the British courts, and you can look it up, was forced by the British courts to sell their product, the company, to Volkswagen. But in a big FU screw around move, they sold the Rolls-Royce name to BMW and sold the company with the debt and the facilities and the workers and all the issues and the pension. They sold it to Volkswagen. So basically, they sold Volkswagen everything but the most valuable part of the company, the name, which they sold to BMW. And so Volkswagen, in normal cases, would be screwed. But what they did was is that everyone forgot about Bentley. Bentley was 50 years ago the brand that if you were a rich person but didn't want the peasants to stone you, would buy the Rolls Royce and you would have Bentley mode. And the Bentley in the old timey days was just a Rolls Royce without the logos on it, literally. And so, but it was a brand. And Volkswagen literally had a supercar lying around. They had the Volkswagen Phaeton, perfect engine, one of the best engines on the planet under the hood. But it was a Volkswagen. Nobody wanted it. So they literally just changed the sheet metal. And the very first of the new generation Bentleys was just a Volkswagen Phaeton with Bentley sheet metal. And it sold like hotcakes because the Phaeton was a phenomenal car. And so I guess long story short, brand counts for more than it should, but at the end of the day, the product still comes through. But that brings us back to pricing, right? Because that Phaeton, once you put the Bentley name on it, even though nothing under the skin changed, it doubled in price just because of the name. The sheet metal didn't add double the price, right? Breitling's Antares adds on, Breitling's retail prices are too expensive, in my opinion. What were we saying just now, right? The market is getting soft in the gray. And what's happening is the retailers are actually moving their prices upward, right? You used to be able to get a Monaco, a Tag Heuer Monaco, the square one, at retail for like 5 and change. Now it's 6 and change, at least where I live. Speedies, you used to be able to buy them at retail for 4 and change. Then it became 5 and change. Now it's 6 and change. So all of this price softening is happening in the gray market. Retail is actually creeping up to match. And in my humble opinion, and as I've said earlier, I'm terrible with money. I believe that the real correction is in the bloated part, right? Because it's only subs and Pateks and stuff that have bloated in value. You could always buy a date just for $12,000 to $14,000, right? I didn't see any date justs go to $20,000, $30,000 just because it had a popular color. So, when we think about that aspect, okay, this whole price crisis that everybody is pissing and moaning and rending their garments and screaming to the skies about, it's in the gray market. Retail prices have gone up, as we have all noticed, right? And they're selling them because people want nice things. And yes, you can get the time from this thing and anything. You could look on any surface today and there's time. But a watch is a beautiful thing. And it's not just beautiful for telling the time, it's something that can give you pleasure if you are into it. And I am. And which goes back to full circle. When I started the conversation at the beginning of the hour, I was saying I picked up this watch yesterday. It's the Cartier Santos XL 100. Ironically, it has the exact same movement that is in my Mito Ocean Star chrono and in the new Tissot PRX chrono. It's the Valjoux 7753. And the funny thing is when I first bought it, I couldn't get over how thick it looked. And I realized I need to measure this thing. And I got out my calipers and I measured it, and it's 14 and change, 14 and a half. And then I measured the Tissot, and that's 15 and change. I'm like, this is actually thinner than the Tissot. And then I measured the Mito, and the Mito is 15 and change as well, or something. In other words, both of those other watches are thicker than this. This just looked thick because it's slab-sided. It didn't get away with the layer cake effect that, a traditional watch design with the bezel and the mount and then the back and all. You can make a watch look way thinner if you stack the compartmentalization on it to fit the movement, because if you look at, I'm going to do, of course, a video on this, but the pushers and the crown are actually relatively low in the case because it is a curved case. So they have to give space for the movement over it. So this is not very watertight. It's just got a 4-screw or possibly 6. I got to double check, but like I said, we're going to do the in-depth look. And so they wanted to incorporate the movement in a way that would integrate as nicely into the case as possible. And as thick as it looks, it's actually thinner than the other 2 watches in my collection that have the same movement. And weirdly enough, mentally, it looked thinner to me after I knew it was thinner than the other watches. I literally spent half the day, what a thick watch this is. And then now I'm like, it's okay. But one of the reasons I bought this watch is I always say I don't invest in watches. So I bought it not as an investment, but as an additional add to the value stock, as it were. I'm not expecting this to go up a lot in price, but I totally expect it to maintain its value for the foreseeable future and maybe gain money, but I know it's not going to go down a penny. This was a $5,500 gray, after used watch, and I paid $49 for it. And right now, if you go to Chrono, it's ranging right about in that price range. But Cartier is in the top 3 as far as retail, and I think they're ahead of Omega right now. So I thought, I like it, and the money, I was saving it up for a Panerai that I was hoping to get my hands on this month, but that didn't come through, and I'm like, no, I got the war chest money. I did save up. It's budgeted. And that's the advantage of saving for a watch, because if you save for a watch and your decision changes, you still have the money to pay for the watch. So never buy a watch on credit. Always save up. And then the nice thing about saving up, it gives you a feeling of power. You walk into that store and you could just drop cash on the counter and take that watch. So that salesperson can't tell you anything. You're a customer. You got money in your pockets. It does. But if you're going in there with your credit card, there's nothing wrong with the credit card, but why pay interest on something you could save for? Because you don't need the watch to tell time. And if it's a luxury buy, and that was another thing I went over in another episode, and I agree with Adrian over at Bark and Jack. I agree with him that there are watches that are not luxury watches. They're premium watches, but a premium watch is still a luxury buy. And there is a difference, and he even recognized the difference between a luxury buy and a non-luxury buy, because to some people, a cup of Starbucks is a luxury buy, and that's not a luxury product, depending on how you look at it. By any stretch of the imagination, in my mind, a $5 cup of coffee is a luxury buy, is a luxury product. I mean, I also read a interesting treatise on how luxury products are a way that the rich take money from the poor that have money, because the rich don't care about luxury. We care about luxury because we're all rubbing the right color of mud into our navels to make sure that the other apes in the tribe like us. And so there is an aspect of that. That's why I pursue my love of horology through my love of engineering and mechanics and all. And so that's another reason why I like this piece, because it's not just a piece of jewelry. It's a functional, rugged chrono for all of its nice looks. I mean, and someone gave me heat for it before, but they brought up the Cartier, and I always like to bring up that the Cartier is the Cartier Santos is the first men's wristwatch. The first wristwatches were made for women. They were called wristlets and were considered effeminate. World War One killed the pocket watch because you cannot fight a war, drive a tank, fly an aircraft with a pocket watch because you need your hands free. And that's why Rolex, everything all ties together in history, of course. And that's one of the reasons Rolex is number one, because Hans Wilsdorf founded Rolex at the turn of the century with the mind to making wristwatches. He knew the future was in the wristwatch, and that's why his core customer base were adventurers and professionals and people who used their hands for swimming, climbing, killing things, whatever, and they flying. And they bought a Rolex because they needed a good watch that cost a little bit more, because Rolex was not a luxury product back then. Rolex is trying really hard to become a luxury product now, but Rolex was not a luxury product then. It was a premium product. And people who needed a good watch bought them, you know. But price-wise, right, this fell 10% in the shop from what they were asking to what I was able to buy, right? When you think of a market crash, even the comically expensive stuff fell, what, 30%. It's not a crash if there's still money left. You know what I'm saying? Most crashes, there's nothing left but ashes. I used to be a Lucent shareholder. Talk to me about that kind of stuff. I figured, how could you screw up Bell Labs? And they showed me graphically at my expense. Sorry about that. Jonas, definitely Breitling's price with the Eddas are too high. Why are they too high? Don't forget they're all owned by the same company. It's essentially an in-house movement, because the Eddas that Breitling gets, and also Breitling also has their own movement that is made by the same shop that makes the Tudor movements, right? I mean, you got to give the retailers their money too. But if you can buy the watch used, that's a different thing. But then that's like cars too. Some people are willing to pay the premium to get the new product, and some people are willing to take a used product. I'm on the fence. If it's an opportunity to get, like I bought this used. If it's an opportunity to get a good watch used, I'll buy it used. There's no stigma in used, but there is a fall off in value from new to used. And if you buy a new watch, you're going to have to pay a new premium. So paying $6K for a new Breitling, that's not out of the question. I mean, if you think about that same watch cost, what, 3.5, 4, 10 years ago, there's also inflation and cost of living increases, and why can't watch people raise their prices too? Obviously, you have to raise the prices within the limits of the market and inflation, and actually, I think they have, because, I mean, look at the aftermarket prices on some watches, right? And those are the ones that everyone's complaining about, right? They're all going, "Oh, now my Patek won't be as much residual." I'm like, "It's still more than retail." So all of these people complaining about the watch price crash, and all the prices we're talking about are still above retail. Who's the butthurt person in that conversation? You and I are not suffering. It's the gray marketers who are suffering. It's not the retailers who are suffering, right? It's the resellers who are suffering. And the resellers who are suffering because Patek and Rolex speculative prices have fallen, I hate to say it, they deserve to get hurt, right? I mean, if you look at somebody like Federico, right, over at Federico Talks Watches, he maintains delraywatch.com, right? He charges what the market will bear, but he used to be in the watch industry. He's not going to overextend himself and buy watches just for speculative value, and he said that many times. So the smart money should never have gotten hurt in this correction. The speculative money got hurt. Good. Let them get hurt. I'm glad they got hurt. Anybody who pumps and dumps, buys a Rolex not to use it or wear it, just to resell it, I hope you got hurt. I really hope you got hurt. You know, if you're buying to resell just to make more money, like I care. As I said, all of these collapsed prices are still over retail. So I personally don't see an issue because I'm not a gray market dealer. I sell, and people know they bought my watches from me. I move watches out of my collection all the time, but I don't even try to make money. I just sell them for what the market value is. And I usually mark it down a little bit, couple hundred less, just to make sure that I can sell it quickly because I'm not trying to make money. I'm just trying to move the watch on so I can buy new watches for the collection. Some wind up in the permanent collection. I think this one's going to wind up in the permanent collection. But when we talk about all of this pricing crash and Rolex is over, yeah, it's over. It may be over short term because their prices are going to come back up because demand isn't going anywhere. But yeah, for the flippers and the gray marketers, I can't even muster crocodile tears. No, no sympathy. Uh, First timer too. Hey, Christian, love the content. I'm really glad you do. And ask me any question, and I'll be more than happy to. If I don't know, I'll look it up for you. Neil, hey Neil, how's it going, my friend? Christian, okay, here we go. My Speedmaster Racing was $600 from 21 to 22 retail. Not sure if that's good or bad. It is because that Speedmaster Racing now is probably up. Well, the thing about the racing, right, is the Speedmasters, they don't go up a lot, but they don't go down a lot. That Speedmaster is going to bump around the $3,000 to $5,000 range for the rest of its life. I got a friend, he's got a it's not beat up, it just hasn't been serviced. I'd give him 3K for it sitting in his safe right now. I'd turn it over, have it cleaned up, and, no, I already have a Speedmaster, so I wouldn't sell it. Or I would actually sell the one that I liked less, because then I would have them both, and I go, I got 2 Speedmasters, and then I'd sell the one that I liked less. But I only sell watches because 'cause I'm trying to make some, room in the collection. For example, I know I'm gonna sell the Glycine, GMT. I've got a Glycine SST, GMT that I bought for my, GMT shootout. Look for the GMT shootout. I've got multiple GMT watches that we're going to compare and contrast and talk about, and I'll include some old footage from my reviews of my Seamaster GMT and my Explorer 2. So we'll really, have some fun looking at some GMTs. But yeah, I'm going to probably sell that Glycine GMT and a couple of the other newer pieces that I acquired, like I'm really glad I got that Farrah chronograph, and I'm looking forward to giving you all the review on that Farrah chronograph. But frankly, it's such a one-trick pony. I know somebody who would actually appreciate it as a daily wear watch, and I'm gonna sell it to them, because I actually sometimes I'm a matchmaker with watches, and sometimes I like to think I can find the right watch for the right person, and they've already expressed interest in it, and so once I do the show on it, I'll probably, move that one along in my collection. So, I'm always buying watches for the collection and selling them, so I'm not a dealer because I'm not trying to make money at this, but I do have a handle on the pricing and what's going on in the industry, and frankly, yeah, the Kermit has fallen in price, but you're still gonna pay 3,000, 3,500 bucks for a, Speedmaster, right? A mainstream mechanical Speedmaster from the '80s to the 2020s. No, the newer ones are gonna cost you more, but like any Speedmaster or Seamaster or even Railmaster, I'm not a big fan of the Railmaster. I never liked their indices. But a mainstream Swiss watch is gonna run you 3 to 5,000. Nothing's changed, really. I mean, the prices have softened, but it's a market correction. But yeah, the high priced watches are totally taking a hit, and power to it. Those speculators, I hope they got hurt. I really do. Especially the Rolex speculators. I really hope they got hurt in this. I hope they lost their shirts. They shouldn't be speculating on other people's love and desires and wishes. That kind of speculation, in my mind, is sick. They need to, think of something with that skill. They could do other things to make money. They don't have to prey on other people to make money. And that's what they're doing. When you speculate on watch prices, you're preying on people. That's all I feel. Pardon me. Christian, hey, it truly wears more like a 42. I wouldn't believe it. Well, the thing about the Speedmasters is, especially the racing, it's got that, it's a really, I don't want to use the word loud because loud implies cheap. It has a good wrist presence. It really does. Even the Rolex reduced. I mean, even the Speedmaster reduced. That's a 39. The Speedmaster reduced looks. I gave one of them to my youngest daughter. Love that piece. Um, Even the Speedmaster reduced looks good on a wrist. And I got a big hand, and I wore it for a while just to break it in for my daughter. Well, I bought it used, so I didn't feel bad wearing it before I gave it to her. But I did. I was planning to give it to her, but I wanted to wear it to get my own feelings on it because that was before I bought my own Man in the Moon Speedmaster, and I was debating would a reduced be enough for me, and I recognized that no, I wanted the bigger one because I have 18 and change, 18 and a half, and plus centimeter wrists. So a big chunk of metal like this doesn't, it works because I got the wrist and the hands for it, but not everybody does, and I recognize that. So I'll never second guess someone's watch choice based upon the watch size because everyone has their own taste. And also, there are people with big wrists and big hands who just like small, elegant watches. George Carlin famously wore a very, very elegant small square watch. And if anybody, I forget the brand, but if anybody could remember that for me, I'd love to know. But yeah, I mean, you see him on his shows and he's wearing some really slim, elegant thing. And he doesn't have small hands either, but it all goes by people's tastes. Some like large, some like small. So I will never armchair quarterback someone else's watch choice, especially when it comes to size. But the Speedmasters all look pretty big. Even the small ones look big. But the nice thing is that the Speedmaster is such a clean design. The big ones don't look huge. You know what I mean? They don't overpower the wrist. That's the nice thing about it. You wear the 42 Man in the Moon and it looks great. So, Levy, hi, Levy. I like vintage Rolex, but not modern. I like the tool watches built for a purpose. Well, I have a whole episode on how the Explorer 2 is the last tool watch Rolex has. And I had an Explorer 2. But I decided to make a partially financial decision to trade it because it had no box, no papers. Trade it and some money for a date just that had box and papers. But frankly, if I came across an Explorer 2 with box and papers, I'd buy it at a reasonable price. I'm on the waiting list for an Air King, but I don't consider that a tool watch. I consider that a sports watch. Rolex is trying to make luxury watches now. And I think the Air King is their last true sports watch. And I think the Explorer 2 is their last tool watch. All the rest of their watches are really trying hard to be luxury watches, which is why they're giving us Tudor. They're saying, well, you wanted to have a Submariner as a working dive watch or a working rugged daily wear watch, and it's too expensive for you now. We care a little bit, so here's a Tudor Black Bay, which is a great watch. I've owned a Black Bay myself, and I'm actually I keep rethinking getting the blue bezel because I had the red bezel, getting the blue bezel black face Black Bay Heritage with the ETA in it because frankly, I think the ETA Black Bay is a more collectible Black Bay than the in-house movement Black Bay because they really went out of their way to rework the ETA to make sure that people wouldn't say that it's just an ETA in the Tudor. They changed the balance mechanism. They changed the hairspring. They changed the shock mechanism. They changed the regulatory mechanism in that watch, and it's more decorated. So I'm thinking of getting that one. So, when you think about all of that, it's all about what you like on your wrist. But me personally, I would rather go for a Black Bay Heritage, which is larger than the Black Bay 58, which is a 39 millimeter. But those watches are obviously different from a different distance looking at size because they're relatively blocky square watches, so it's easier to get perspective. But like, unless you see them side by side, a Speedmaster Reduced or a Speedmaster Racing and a Speedmaster Man in the Moon, 39 to 42 millimeters, because of the way they're designed, they don't look that much different individually. Next to each other, you'd see the difference in size, but yeah, you can go, but then that's why you have to wear a watch on your wrist, or at least see it in through a shop window at least. Photographs don't do justice to a watch. You need to see it in the metal to really get an appreciation for how it's gonna be on your wrist. You really do. Let's see, Levy, I like vintage Rolex. Oh, yeah, we read that one. Antares. True, I saw my AD and it really looks like a 42. The lug to lug seems reasonable. Well, I mean, and it's such a classic. The Speedmaster in its day, the Speedmaster in its day was considered a big gadgety watch. And today, because the design has gotten watch design, clothing, everything has gotten much more aggressive and in your face. Uh, a modern Speedmaster is considered elegant, restricted. I have mine on a leather strap. I've got the factory alligator on my Speedmaster. I wear it with a suit. I don't even wear it as I wear other watches. I don't wear because mine's a Hesalite, so I don't want to get banged up anyway. Um, but the Speedmaster on a leather strap looks awesome in a suit. You should check. I got some pictures on Instagram, and or if you ping me, I'll send them to you directly because I'm a big advocate, and I've always been a big advocate of strap changing around on watches to get a feel and a look that you're really into. I'm actually thinking about buying a metal strap, the metal bracelet for this, but then I'm worried that it might make it too jewelry looking. So I think I'm just going to stick with the leather on that. But the strap makes a big difference too, even though the strap doesn't tell the time, and that's something I've also talked about. Let's see. Johnny, hi Levi. This is the same reason Tudor is gaining with time. Well, that's exactly it. The new Tudor is the old Rolex, reasonably priced tool watches for people who want a premium timepiece and don't want to mess around. They don't want to buy something made of gold. They want a watch that works. They don't. The cost in a Tudor is not the cost of precious metals or any of that or diamond bling bling. The cost of a Tudor or the cost of a JLC or the cost. Okay, I won't say cost of a cost of a steel Cartier. Let's put it that way. I like watches where the value is in how the watch was made and what the watch is, rather than what the watch is made out of. And there are others that agree. I gather you agree with me as well. But then again, there's nothing wrong with a blingy watch. They just have different purposes. But a good tool watch should be waterproof. Well, the reason that Cartier made the Santos, matter of fact, the full name of it is the Santos Dumont, is because Santos Dumont was a Brazilian aviator back in the time of the Wright brothers, and he told Cartier, hopefully over something strong, that he couldn't fly an airplane and use his pocket watch. He needed a watch for his wrist, and Cartier created the Santos for him. And then Cartier created a tank watch, which was made for officers and infantry. These watches originally were just rugged steel watches. If you think about it, all this watch really is a square watch with a screw down face and a screwed on back. They polished it up. I mean, if this didn't have a shiny face and I put a NATO on it, I mean, and there weren't Roman numerals, stick indices, wouldn't be any much different from a lot of the field watches you see in the world today. This was the first field watch. This was the first pilot's watch. Not this specific model, but the Santos. Um, Tool watches are important, and that's why watches will exist after we are all long gone. Watches will exist because there will be always the functionality of having information at your wrist when your hands are occupied. And that could be a Pip Boy. Pip Boy is just a fancy smartwatch, or it could be a wrist computer on a spacesuit. But putting information on your wrist so you can see it conveniently is an application that will never go away. Let's see. Yeah, Johnny said Levi says to Johnny, I agree. I love my Black Bay 58. Yeah, Tudor makes some good watches. They really do. I keep thinking about getting a North Flag. The only reason I haven't yet is I'm still trying to get past the yellow. But the North Flag is a really, really nice watch. Levi, Levi. Um, I like the vintage Explorer 1 and the GMT Masters. Great watches, classic watches. And that's the thing about Rolex is that I mean, I own a Datejust. I used to own multiple Rolexes. I used to have, I actually had a bluesy at one point, the two-tone blue sub. The only reason I got rid of that is that people expect you to be a completely different person. They expect a kind of a weird pseudo yuppie attitude from you or something, or they think you're a jerk when you're wearing. I mean, you have to be hanging around with people who have more expensive watches than you if you have a bluesy. Because if you have a bluesy, 9 times out of 10, you have the most expensive watch in the room, and people think you're a jerk. And that's not why I want people to look at me for wearing watches. And frankly, if once I'm retired and I don't have to worry about what people, actually, it's not that I worry about what people think. It's just I don't need to be bothered by people giving me static over the watch I wear. But yeah. I'd be open to buying another bluesy, but watch collecting is a very complicated thing, right? It's all about what your own individual tastes are. And the thing about Tudor and Rolex, and I've gone into it in multiple episodes. I've got kind of a love-hate relationship with these people. And Rolex is they're a charitable nonprofit organization. A lot of people don't know that about Rolex. They're a charitable nonprofit organization with very strong ties to the Swiss government. And so they can do whatever they want. It's the speculators that are damaging the image of the company. And that's why I don't mind if they get hurt in this price correction. It's not a free fall. The bottom's not falling out of the market. Retail prices haven't gone anywhere. The gray market prices are still above retail. So they're all just whining. Yeah, screw them. Neil, get the Bull of a Lunar Pilot. Great watch. My friend has a Bull of a Lunar Pilot. I talked him into it. My problem is my collection's not big enough to have 2 watches that are so similar. That's the reason I sold my IWC Pilot Chrono, and I did an episode comparing them. Even though it's not the same as a Speedmaster, it fills that niche in a collection. And I'm not a box checker, but I don't like having 2 watches that are too similar. And I did manage to get my hands on another IWC. I got my hands on the Antoine limited edition, the one that they named after the author of The Little Prince. And I managed to get my hands on one of them, no box, no papers, but they only made 1,188 of them. So I'm not worried about it. And that's got an in-house movement, and it's a true GMT with the flying hour hand, and that's going to be in my GMT shootout. Subscribe. Please leave a like at least. Let's see. So yeah, the Bull of a Lunar Pilot is a great watch. No disagreement there. Oh, just gave me a follow on Instagram, Levy. I do post a lot of watch pictures on Instagram, so I encourage you to subscribe on Instagram as well. And I sometimes give alerts on the shows, but I didn't notice a lot of traction from that, so I don't do that a lot. I just post a lot of watch pictures on Instagram. Let's see, Johnny Arsenal. What's my opinion with silicon parts, good or bad? I'm for them. Because the thing about a silicon part is they're using silicon as a material. And that's what I think some of the people get away from their hatred, or I shouldn't say hatred, their distrust, their dislike of silicon is because they associate silicon with electronics. Whereas in this case, they're using silicon as a material. So essentially it's engineered glass, right? It's just glass. So that Omega silicon hairspring is a glass hairspring. And people like Watch Art Sci Guy, right? He used to be very against silicon parts. His position has softened a great deal recently, and I think it's because even his lovely favorite companies are now migrating to silicon because you make a hairspring out of silicon. Number one, since it's a micro electromechanical manufacturing process using etch technology like wafer etch technology, every single hairspring is identical. And frankly, since it's a physical hairspring, anybody who says that watchmaker could stretch the hairspring and jigger it and blah, 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 any watchmaker that talented could fabricate a watch spring to fit the space because the silicon hairspring isn't magic. It's just made out of silicon. So you put another hairspring into that space and get it to anchor at both ends and it's going to function. There's no magical thing keeping you from replacing that silicon part with a metal part. There's literally nothing keeping you from replacing that silicon part with a metal part. They replaced metal parts with silicon parts to reduce issues of magnetism and wear. Because don't forget, since that escapement wheel is now glass in the, for example, in the all of the Zenith El Primeros currently, the pallet fork and the escapement is made out of the escapement wheel is silicon. That means almost no wear. That means you don't need lubrication, right? Metal on glass, they put a little bit in certain plate cases. In certain cases, it's not good to lubricate those parts, and they don't wear. All of these watches have what, 10-year warranties? 10-year warranty with a mechanical watch is like a car that never needs an oil change. If the silicon parts were that bad, the companies wouldn't be putting their hard money down and saying, we'll fix this in 10 years if something goes wrong with it. And some people worry about parts not being available. In 50 years, if we don't destroy ourselves in a nuclear annihilation or global warming doesn't kill us, we'll each have a 3D printer in our kitchen that'll make a part that we could replace in a 50-year-old watch. You know, a modern watch will, in 50 years from now, a modern watch will be like pooped out of a machine with integral parts already embedded in the metal or plastic matrix or whatever, with vias embedded into the case and such. Um, People worrying about maintaining a mechanical device 50 years from now, especially if they're talking about silicon parts, scan it, laser scan it, and then 3D print the metal part or the plastic part and replace the silicon part if it bothers you that much. A plastic hairspring would work too. It wouldn't necessarily be it might actually be more springy, but they couldn't use plastic, even though plastic is a very superior material. Because there are watchmakers who already get crap. The Lemania 5100, the Omega 186, the 18. I'm not going to try to pull numbers out of my butthole. But there are a lot of watches with plastic parts, and they get crap for their plastic parts. There could be more plastic parts in a watch. I think the key is it a mechanical watch? Because as long as it's a mechanical watch, you can make those parts out of anything. Wood. You could literally carve an entire. Nobody's doing it with a movement because that movement would run for about an hour. Unless you carved it out of wood and then embedded all the wood in epoxy resin and then recarved the pieces, because then basically you would just have epoxy resin parts that used wood as part of the matrix, you know? But no, silicon parts in a watch, they're using the silicon as a material. It's not bastardizing the watch. The watch is still a mechanical watch. They're just using silicon parts. The silicon is a material. Think of it as they're able to engineer glass, which is what they are. But that's all a silicon hairspring is, or a pallet fork, or a escape wheel. It's just material. You could, like I said, you can carve them out of wood. Anyone who's going to that argument, it doesn't change the nature of the mechanical system. I could make a watch out of ice if I was in a cold enough place and the pieces wouldn't melt before I put them all together. Materials are material. Silicon parts, I'm totally cool with them because they make the watch amagnetic. You can't magnetize glass. So that's why Omegas are good to 15,000 Gauss. They didn't like make a witch hex over them. It's got a transparent back. Normally, to get any kind of anti-magnetic, you have to put an internal soft iron core shield around the movement to deflect the magnetic fields. If your hairspring can't be magnetized, that's no longer an issue. That lets you make the watch thinner. That lets you go longer without lubricants, farther between maintenance. It's nothing but a good thing, my friend. Really. So, James Duffy. Hey, James. I am torn on the North Flag because I'm expecting a refresh of the North Flag soon. I must admit I'm kinda waiting for that too. Because the North Flag is a great piece, and like I said, I'm just trying to get past the yellow. But they're doing new North Flag. They came out with that new, uh, Everest watch thingy, the I forget the name, a Ranger. They just came out with the Ranger. Actually, the Ranger wasn't an Everest, but, you know what I mean. But they just came out with why not a North Flag? Frankly, I think the North Flag would have been a better reissue than this Ranger because I hate to say it, if you wanna go clean, go IWC. They make clean look luxurious. That new Tudor Ranger looks lame. You're spending what, $3,000 and the face doesn't say anything to me. That's one of the criticisms against the new Orises. I still wanna get the Oris, skeleton, but then the face issues don't, apply, but no, people are spending thousands of dollars on this watch. Make the face look like something? Yes, it's a reissue. Yes, it's a retro, but make the indices little lumps of, loom like on the Black Bay Pro, or outline them in metal or something. But you're gonna give us a $3,000, $4,000 watch that looks like, eh, eh? No, no, no. I'm sorry. It just doesn't look interesting enough for me. And if you're gonna drop that kind of money on a watch, buy a Speedmaster, buy a Seamaster, even a Railmaster, although I don't like Railmasters very much, but, or buy a regular Santos, buy a Reverso. There are so many. Buy a Polaris. There are so many great watches out there. So many great watches out there, you know? Don't settle just because people say you should buy that watch. Buy a watch because you wanna buy it, not because other people tell you that's the watch you should be buying. Levy, the Tudor North Flag is a really cool watch. I agree. James, love the bold, almost cartoonish color blocking of the North Flag. Like I said, I wish it were any other color but yellow. I'd have one already. Nice watch. And one of the first with the, display back, because it was the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first to have the, in-house movement in it. So the North Flag is also a collectible in that sense. It is historic in the, heritage of Tudor because it was the first with the in-house movement and the first with a display back, but not their first field watch. Oh, James says, "Yes, it's decidedly modern. Like the difference." Shy Robert, "Hey, how's it going, Shy? Would I buy 2 of the same watch and keep one in the box so I have the best of both worlds?" I don't have that much money. I don't have that much money. Um, for example, I have decided, it was my Grail watch, and I've had it for several years. I decided I'm gonna sell, well, if I can't sell it for what I want, I'm gonna keep it, obviously. Well, I shouldn't say obviously. Some watches I would sell at a loss. But, my Zenith Chronomaster Open Heart, I was thinking of selling it, and so I have it up for commission at a local shop. And, he pointed out there was a scratch on the back. I'm like, "Well, it's not on the front." But I didn't even see the scratch on the back. But that's what happens when you wear a watch. And frankly, I'd rather take the hit on the value and have worn the watch and enjoyed the watch than to worry about the residuals. I'd rather sell it for €1,000 less and have worn it and enjoyed it. And I wore it and I enjoyed it. And I wore it in cool places and I had fun with it and wore it with a suit in some nice sharp places and wore it on a NATO with jeans in some places. I had fun with that watch. So if it takes a price hit in resale because it's got a scratch on it, I don't have that kind of money. And the thing is, if I had that kind of money, then I wouldn't care about the damage to the watch. I wouldn't have to buy two because I would take the hit on the value loss. They still want the watch. All the scratches are going to do is reduce its asking price, but it's not going to take 30% off the price of a watch. It's not going to take 50% scratches. If someone's trying to Presbyterian you down too deep on a watch just because of scratches, keep it and move on. Because scratches, number one, show you haven't polished it, because polishing is detrimental to a watch over time. And scratches also shows that, it was owned and worn. Probably not a fake, because fakes don't last. I did a whole episode looking at some fakes just last week. And then one of the things about fakes is that they are not built well and they fall apart. So if you have a watch with some scratches on it, shows it's been worn, that all just vouches for the watch, in my humble opinion. I mean, in a perfect world, I would just take really good care of the watch and have enough watches that if I went anywhere that was even detrimental potentially to a watch, I'd wear one of my beater watches. I actually have what I consider beater watches, but they're not really beaters. They're just lesser expensive watches in my collection. Like I paid $500 for my Seiko 5 GMT, and I would call that a beater. But if it got a big scratch on it, I'd still be upset. Let's see. Antares, did I ever service one of my watches and what does it cost? I service my watches all the time. I've got two watchmakers that I use regularly. I live in a small town and there are about 5 watch shops, and I actively work with 2 of them with their watchmakers, because sometimes I'll buy a used watch and factor in the cost of repair, because I know that watch is being sold at that price because it's getting close to service. Um, I've talked about my Oyster Quartz, which I did sell and I don't miss, but I'm glad I owned it. I paid €1,700 for the service on that one, but it got a new warranty card, which allowed me to sell it at market price when I did decide to sell it. Uh, when my Speedmaster double chronograph, it was bouncing a little too much for my taste when it was coming back, so I had it serviced just to tighten it up, to tighten up the movement. I service my pieces all the time, and you have to factor it into the cost of your collection. You're going to be spending $500 to $1,000 a couple times a year, and you're not going to get a watch. You're just going to be servicing the watches you have. I got a couple coming up. There are a couple that I'm like, if you keep up with that, like, because I've got a time grapher, and I pay it. I actually check my watches when I don't, not religiously, but every once in a while I'll also slap it in the time grapher. I'm like, oh, I can tell you're getting a little dirty inside because you're not running as well as you used to. And once it starts running a little too slow or starts acting up, I'll take them in for service, because that watch costs you several $1,000s. To spend a couple $100, even $500, $600, $700, you're still spending less than 20% of the watch's value to keep it running, and it's worth zero if it breaks. Zero, right? So it's worth maintaining, like a car. That car's useless sitting in front of the yard with nothing running. And so the key is take good care of your watches and keep them in a clean and dry place. Have them serviced when they need it. Don't over-service your watches. Some companies want you to service them all the time. I service them when they start showing signs that they need servicing. And some people would disagree with me there. Some people would say, no, service them on the interval. I don't. I service them when I keep a good eye on my watches, and I service them when they need it. But I service them. I spent money this year. This year I'm already probably $500 in the hole because I had a pocket watch I serviced, my little dirty pocket watch. I had that one serviced for 300 because it may be a funny erotic pocket watch, but it still has a 100-year-old Tissot movement in it. And I had, what did I have serviced? I don't even remember what I had serviced that I paid for. But you got to take care of your watches. It if they don't work, they're not worth anything. And you can't wear them, which means they're not worth anything at all because you can't even get use out of them. Because a watch that's worth nothing that runs, you can still enjoy wearing it. But a watch that doesn't run doesn't help anybody. So yeah, it's a necessary. I wouldn't even call it a necessary evil. It's just maintenance. What do they say in Rick and Morty? It's like wiping your butt or brushing your teeth. You got to do it. Let's see. Silicon parts are becoming normal James Duffy says, silicon parts are becoming normal in the industry. It is a natural evolution of watchmaking. Exactly. Well, because silicon parts give you two things that a watchmaker really likes. One of them is amagnetism, right? That watch with the silicon hairspring, pallet fork, and escapement wheel is no longer susceptible to magnetic fields at all. And the other aspect that is very beloved by watchmakers is that it's consistent. I make 1,000 silicon hairsprings in a wafer fab, and they're all identical. The escapement wheels are all identical. Pallet forks are all identical. So that's one of the things Omega has taken advantage of. Every single one of their hairsprings is identical in all of their watches. They can regulate them more easily. There's less of a variance in performance. They know they're going to last a long time. They don't need as much lubrication. None at all in the places where the silicon touches the metal directly. So if you think about a pallet wheel and escapement fork banging away in there, which is one of the number one break points in a system, one of the mainspring is another area of issue. Having silicon parts extends the life. That's why they can get away with a 10-year warranty. They wouldn't give you a 10-year warranty on a multi-$1,000 part that would cost thousands of, hundreds of dollars to repair if they weren't confident you're not going to need it. That way they can say, yeah, they say they're saving as much money as you are. So let's see. Terry, hey, Terry. Zenith, A038 Revival, Panda. What do I think? I think number one, like I said, I've got a Zenith. Well, frankly, the biggest reason I'm selling my open heart Chronomaster is I want the sport Chronomaster, the one that is tweaking the nose of the Daytona. I want the sport because my Chronomaster is a dress Chronomaster. I'm selling it so I can buy a sport Chronomaster, and I think Zenith is a fantastic company, and they're finally coming into their own, and all of their pieces are solid, every single one of them. And that Panda is a beautiful, beautiful piece. It's the one with the sloped lugs. I think that's a very cool look. Let's see. Do I favor chronometer watches over ordinary watches? I like complicated watches. A chronograph is my favorite complication, but actually at this point, I would say it's tied with GMT. Nah, it's still my favorite. GMT is my second favorite complication. So most of my watches are chronographs or GMTs. I have a couple of three-handers. My Datejust is a three-hander. My JLC is a three-hander, but pretty much all my other pieces are complicated. Even my Cartier is a chrono because well, like I said, I come from the mechanical engineering side of it, and I just love that complexity. I just love it. Oh, and also silicon parts are less temperature sensitive, as James points out. Did I ever do a review for the Polaris? Antari says, yes, I did. You could look it up, but I think it's time for it's been more than a year. It's time to do a revival, but check out the original and keep your eye open. I'll do another. Matter of fact, I think I'll probably do that with all of the pieces, that I've had for more than a year that I've done a review on that I still have in my hands. I'll do some revivals. Let's do what do I think of it, after all this time? In the case of the Polaris, I still love it. I still love it. Not as much. I must admit, I still think my Omega Globemaster annual calendar is still the favorite piece in my entire collection. It's just such an elegant, versatile watch with a I wouldn't call it, a high complication, but a very premium complication in the annual calendar. Johnny asks, "Is the cost of COSC worth it?" COSC. Official chronometer? Yeah, yeah, because it's not just about the performance numbers, it's what you have to do to achieve them, right? And so in a mechanical watch movement, in order to be +6 -4, which is COSC, COSC, it's +6 seconds a day, -4 seconds a day. That's a 10-second span. You have to have a precise mechanism, and precise mechanisms means you have to have tight tolerances, which means you have to have everything lined up properly, which means you have to have good engineering, which means it has to be assembled well, which means it has to be put together properly, which means it has to all line up. So a watch that is an official chronometer isn't just an accurate watch. It's also a reasonably well built one because you can't have it that precise without it being well built. So it's what I would call a secondary indicator of quality. If it's a Swiss regulated chronometer, not chronograph stopwatch, chronometer is accurate watch. If it's chronometer rated, then it also implies that the watch is made well because you can't have a watch accurate if it's not made well. Let's see. What do I think about the JLC Master Control calendar in blue? I wish I had the money to buy it. I have nothing negative to say about it. I think it's a beautiful piece. I love it. And I own a dozen $5,000 watches. I could buy a couple of, sell some and buy a few higher price pieces. But I hate to say it. I used to say 5 to 6,000 was as much as I'd pay for a watch. At this stage, I wouldn't want to go over 10. If only for the worries I would have walking around drunk with it. Um, but I would own that watch. That's a beautiful piece. Oh my goodness, JLC makes some really I have a Polaris three-hander. I love that watch, and, it's my second favorite in my collection, and that master calendar is an awesome piece. Everything horology should be JLC is known as the watchmaker to the watchmakers. They made movements for, Vacheron Constantin, Audemars Piguet, and, Patek Philippe, and the only reason they're not considered in the highest level is they're not a jewelry watch company. They're they don't go over the top with any of their stuff, so they're considered by a lot of people upper middle, which I don't agree with. I do consider JLC truly luxury watches and high horology at that. My Polaris is 1,000 hour regulated. JLC doesn't play around. They're really a great company. So COSC certification is lost after service unless is submitted again for certification. Well, if it's serviced by a certified facility, they would go ahead and do that as part of the service. Like Rolex, you get a Rolex back. Well, Rolex doesn't do COSC, but if you get a Rolex back, it's to Rolex regulation +2, -2. If you send out an Omega, it comes back COSC. If you send it to Omega, local guys, no. Local guys and gals know. But if you send a name brand flag carrier, as it were, watch to the factory, it'll come back uh, certified. And sometimes they'll even give you the paperwork that they did that, to show that they made sure that it was back in order, which is why they charge as much as they do for the service because they charge you for that part too. I see we're past the top of the hour, but that's always what happens when we're having a great time. I try to keep the shows to about an hour because I don't want to, overwhelm people when they're looking at how long the thing is online. So, um, yeah, I agree. Johnny Arsenal says the inside of the JLC is enough to cut your breath by its beauty. They're beautiful movements. It's the best looking movement in my collection is in my JLC. But yes, as I was saying, now it's time we have to say goodbye or whatever she did before tugging on her ear, Carol Burnett. The show it's time to end the show. So I'll see you all next week. Okay, I'll read James's comment one more time. Get out of here. True, factory service always tries to get a watch back in like new, which is why they swap out parts if you don't explicitly ask them not to. It's safer for them. It's safer for them. If they put new parts in, they know they can warranty the watch. If they keep the old parts in, they know they can't guarantee, because when that watch comes back and it has a 2-year warranty card, it means 2 years, not 18 months maybe. And the only way they can guarantee that is by putting in new parts, and then they can guarantee that it'll work during the time that they say the warranty is good for. So, live long and prosper. Have a great week. I love you all. Take care and have a fantastic evening, and enjoy the rest of your week. I think I said that twice, but that's okay. It bears repeating. Bye-bye, everybody.